whatever the threat is, whatever the villain is, whatever the mortal peril is, you know, the vampire is a good fit for that kind of archetype, because it can go in so many different ways. You know, it can be the guy next door. It can be, you know, the exotic thing coming into your world. Looking back on it now, it's sort of, you know, idyllic. It was, I grew up in a nuclear family. I had grandparents here as well, and went to Westwoods Elementary School, and still am Facebook friends with, you know, half my class who was there. So it was a really nice, peaceful, wonderful place to grow up. You know, very safe, very quiet. Too quiet once you got a little older, but my father had a drugstore. He had a little corner drugstore down here around the corner, and one Christmas they got me a little Super 8 camera, a little 8mm Super 8 camera, and because I wanted to make movies, I guess, and so I started doing that. And he had the drugstore, and so I would make the movie, give it to him, he'd pop it in an envelope and they'd send it away, you know, and then you'd have to wait like 2 weeks to get your movie back and see what it was you actually shot, or, you know, see if you left the lens cap on or whatever. But that sort of got me into it. And then they started, when I was about 11 years old, they started the Children's Theater here at the South Arkansas Arts Center. And that's where I really sort of jumped on board of doing plays and the sets and really creating drama. The Rialto was the only cinema here when I was growing up, and until probably the early to mid 70s, the Jerry Lewis cinema, I guess the early 70s, there was a twin cinema, which was cutting edge in those days. We had twin cinemas. So the Jerry Lewis Cinema, it was called, because it was his franchise that was named after him or whatever. And it was a big deal when it opened up, because you had a choice of movies at that point. But up until then, you know, if you wanted to see a movie, you saw the movie that was on, and that was the Rialto. They had mainstream movies, and then on the weekends they would have sort of, not Grindhouse, but something like that, sort of, you know, Count Yorga and, you know, the Born Losers and all that stuff. You know, motorcycle movies and, you know, sort of more counterculture stuff, which was great. But I saw mainstream movies. I saw Gone with the Wind there. I saw Fantastic Voyage there. Fantastic Voyage sticks out in my mind because it's, I actually ran screaming out of the theater. I was terrified. My mother had dropped me off, and with the assumption that I'd be fine, and I knew where she was, so I left the theater and, you know, sort of ran to her skirt, you know. But yeah, it was great. I mean, it's a beautiful theater, you know, and it really captured sort of the essence of when going to a movie was a special thing. You know, they were movie palaces. You know, as I say, I had grown up on movies. I had grown up not only on the Rialto and the twin cinemas here, but because El Dorado is so isolated, we've had cable TV for years. I mean, we had it in the 60s, right? Because there's no other way to get any signal here. So we had it pretty early on, and when HBO first started, we had that in I guess the early 70s, or, you know, and so I was exposed to a lot of stuff on that as well, you know, because it was sort of the same thing. If you wanted to watch a movie, you watched what they had on. So I was really familiar with the nature of film, I guess, and how it was done and all that stuff, and so it wasn't really that much of a challenge. And plus, having grown up here, I was really eager to embrace a city. Well, a lot of it is here. I mean, my friend Trip Phillips, who is my age, who I did theater with here, is the most sought after stage manager in New York City now. So he's, you know, it's like the old, it's a very nurturing place, and it's like apprenticeship in a way. You know, you learn the craft, you learn what goes into putting on a play or a production, and So you just sort of come out with it, you absorb it. Like you just get out of here and you kind of know, you have a sense of how things are done. And I think part of that is because of its isolation, you know. I mean, initially, you know, if it's the same thing. If you wanted to see a play, you had to do it yourself. If you wanted to see art, you had to do it yourself. And when I was here, when I was a kid, we had and maybe they still do, I don't know, we had a little symphony, we had a South Arkansas Symphony, we had a ballet, we had the art classes here. My mother took sculpture here, you know, and it was a real asset to the community, huge. And yeah, the first thing I ever saw here was The Wizard of Oz. And they did it. We didn't have munchkins in those days, so they used kids, local kids, for it. And I came to that musical, and Tripp Phillips was the mayor of Munchkin Land, and all these other kids were up there in costumes with adults, having a blast with a live orchestra. You know, it was like a veil had been lifted. It's like, oh, we have this, and yeah, I signed up and never looked back. I got a degree in humanities. Yeah, I did the plays and a lot of theater classes, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got out, so committing to a theater degree at that point was, you know, I wanted to hedge my bets and just say, you know, at that point in the 80s, you know, they were saying that companies really look for humanities degrees because it shows you're well-rounded, you know, lots of different experiences and all that stuff. So I grabbed onto a humanities degree, and that's what I left with. But I did do a lot of theater there. I was at Hendrix in the spring of '83. I was about to graduate with my humanities degree, and I had no idea what I was going to do, really. I had applied to law school and a couple of law schools and took the LSAT, and you know, that was kind of, and also I studied religion there as well, so I was considering a career in the ministry, but none of it was really, I wasn't really terribly passionate about most of it. And then so my parents said, why don't you go to an acting school? Why don't you go to California and see what it's like, see if you enjoy it? Because I had had success here and in college, and there was a visiting director at Hendrix who was affiliated with an acting school in the Bay Area in San Francisco called the Drama Studio London. He was affiliated with the London school, but they had just opened up a branch out there. So he wrote me a letter. I got the audition, got into the school, and I ended up there. And at the end of that first year, Peter Bogdanovich was doing a movie called Mask, and the woman who was casting it for him, Jackie Birch, was sort of casting out for, to see for possibilities for playing the young boy in that. And an agent in San Francisco got wind of that and called the head of my school and said, "Do you have anybody who's skinny and sickly and boyish?" You know, so I popped to the top of the barrel there, and. So I did a video audition. They sent it to LA. Bogdanovich liked it, so I went down and met him, and and had a very good meeting and stuff. I didn't end up getting it, but a short time later, after I had graduated the school, I called Jackie Birch and said, "I'm going to come down and visit. You know, can I take you to lunch, buy you coffee, blah blah blah?" And she said no, but she said, "I am doing a movie now. Why don't you come in and read for it?" So I came in and read for it, and that was Fright Night. Well, I read Dracula. I grew up on the vampire flicks, Hammer and Count Yorga and Christopher Lee and all that stuff, and so I knew I was very well acquainted with vampire stuff, and I just looked at it from a regular actor point of view. And the point of view is that this can't be happening. This can't be a real thing, which is what you would experience. So I didn't have to incorporate anything outside of my experience necessarily. If I was a commando or something like that really existed. This is something that was unreal to me that suddenly was in my lap, and so that was You know, it's just being a human being. It's kind of like Harvey, I guess, you know, that I see something that nobody else does, but they love me and they care about me, so they're trying to be supportive in their way, you know, and it's the comedy that comes out of that situation as opposed to them, you know, let's be funny in this scene, you know. It was just everybody was being pretty genuine to their humanity. I mean, we talked about this before, that the Lost Boys kind of brought a rock and roll, you know, 80s glam rock kind of thing to hairband kind of thing to it, which is cool. I mean, it's always been updated. You know, there's always been modernization of the vampire myth, and our movie was a little more traditional. You know, it was a real tip of the hat to the Hammer films and to the traditional vampire, to Dracula, to traditional vampire stuff. But just kind of placed in a modern world. So they kind of came at it from different angles. He was so genuine and so accessible that I'd never felt any. I mean, it was cool to be there with Cornelius, you know, but he did look a little different than he did in the movies. So, but I had grown up, I was a big Night Gallery fan growing up, and he would, you know, sort of did the initial pilot, I think, in that series. And so I was just always a fan, and Flicka, and, you know. You know, it's like I kind of knew who he was, you know, and he was there was no pretension to him at all. It was just, you know, he was as welcoming as somebody, you know, that I would work with here. He was kind of a mentor, I guess, but he, even though he had been a child star, he was not a megastar at that point. You know, I mean, he wasn't a big movie star at that point. So he had realism. He knew, you know, he knew the playing field. He knew how it was, and he had been through rough times. He had been through, you know, being on top and then being sort of discarded. So he came to it with a humility that that you have to learn, I think, and not everybody has. So he was great to be around. He was a great influence in that way. And he was a huge movie buff. He was an historian, you know. He was a curator of the films, and so he respected the art form, and he loved the art form, and you know, you got that immediately. We would walk from our sound stage to the commissary on the Laird lot, the David O. Selznick lot, and he could tell you what was filmed in each sound stage, who was in it, you know, the gossip of what happened on the shoot. You know, it was like you know, it's like your own walking tour of Hollywood. You know, he was really amazing.